Veasey is on a very important group of subcommittees on the Energy and Commerce Committee. Please, take a chance, just introduce yourself, tell a little bit of your background and your story and your priorities in your work on the committee and INCOMPAS.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hi, I'm Marc Veasey. I'm the congressman, as was mentioned, from the 33rd Congressional District. I live in Fort Worth, and I represent the cities of Fort Worth and Dallas. And so good to be with y'all, good to see everyone, and great to be a part of this discussion today. This is my 7th term in Congress. I got elected in 2012, and this is my 4th term on the Energy and Commerce Committee. In the past, I've been on the Energy and Commerce Committee and the House Armed Services Committee, but I wasn't able to get a waiver this time around. But happy to be continuing my work on the Energy and Commerce Committee because it's such a key committee, as all of you know, for Congress. Previous to my service in the House of Representatives, I've served 8 years in the Texas state legislature, which is a completely different experience than being in Washington, D.C. And I've heard that experience has changed quite a bit since I left. So I've been working in public policy for a while. And then previous to that, I was actually a congressional staffer. So for those of you that have been around a second, I worked for Martin Frost, who had been in Congress for 25 years, represented much of the same area that I did. And what got me interested in politics is when I was in the 8th grade, I had an uncle that worked for Jim Wright, who had been the majority leader of the House of Representatives. He represented the 12th Congressional District out of Fort Worth. And my uncle had been a television reporter, and then he left TV news and he went to go work for Jim Wright. And that was, and he worked when he was majority leader. He worked for him right before he became speaker. And so that's really what sort of got my interest in politics going. And so I've been kind of doing it a while now. If you think about the time that I was a staffer back in the 90s working for Congressman Frost and now being a member myself, I've been doing it for a second.
I started on Senator Trent Lott's staff, and I've always thought staffers make the best members.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, the one disadvantage is that when you go from being a staffer to a member, did you feel like you lost all of your power and influence?
That is a great question. I'll tell you where I really realized I lost all of my power. It wasn't when I became a staffer from a member. It was when I went from the state legislature and came here. Because when you're in the state legislature, members really do run their offices there. And when you are in the U.S. House of Representatives, your entire life, your scheduler, the one here in D.C. and the one back home, your chief of staff, your legislative director, like people are literally running your entire life. And I think that some of the horror stories that you hear about members, not having sort of strained relationships with their staff, and we won't go into any of the stories. Everybody here has heard them. But I think a lot of that is probably because people haven't been members before and they get here and they don't realize just how much of your life is going to be controlled. Even when I'm back in the district and I want to spend time with my family, I'm like, okay, on Sundays, unless it's something really big, I'm like, don't schedule anything because that's when we go to church. That's when we're in the backyard barbecuing and doing family. And you have to be very deliberate and very intentional. To where in the state legislature, you just kind of ran your life the way that you wanted to, and you ran your office the way you wanted to. And it's just not like that here. And I think that people that come here that still want that type of control, and you can't have it. And I think that's when you hear these horror stories, that's what that's about, is people trying to control something that you absolutely cannot and should not be controlling, and that you have to let go of. But you have to put the parameters up to make sure that your personal life and the things that you like to do are held intact. But you have to let go. You got to let go.
One thing I enjoy about my conversations with our different guests is getting to hear a little bit of the human side of the members of Congress and trying to have the work-life family balance, the relationships with staff and what that means. I want to talk about your community a little bit, and you tell me what's most important to the to the area that you represent, an urban suburban area.
Yeah.
Broadband needs, affordability, access, education. What are you doing? And as our membership here advocates for the deployment of BEAD, for more competition that drives prices down, increases affordability and connectivity, what are the things that you care about for as it relates to the broadband connectivity and infrastructure of your district?
No, I'm glad you asked me that question. And just to kind of let everyone know what my district is like, because you've heard a lot about the DFW area and you've heard about all the growth and how many people are moving there and the housing prices. But I want you to, when you think about a low income area in DC, like Anacostia, for instance, and think about a collection of neighborhoods that are very similar to that throughout Dallas, Fort Worth. And that's what my district kind of looks like. I'm in a majority Latino district with all that also has a large African-American population with a handful of nice areas in the district, but it's mainly a district that is very low income. A lot of people in the district, English is their second language, or Spanish may be the only language spoken in the home. And in addition to that, again, it's very low income. About a third of the residents that I represent don't even have health care insurance. And so when you think about the Dallas-Fort Worth area and the prosperity that we're experiencing, everything that you've read and heard about that is true. But we still have these older neighborhoods that are very low income, and they're mainly in the district that I represent, myself and probably next door in Jasmine Crockett's district. We represent the highest concentration of low income. And and I think that you have to be, I used the word intentional earlier. I think you have to be very intentional if you're going to try to help people pull themselves out of poverty, about how those communities have access to the same sort of things that we take for granted every day. And broadband is one of those things that most of us have inside of our homes, inside of our apartments, inside of our office spaces, but lower income families don't necessarily have access to that. And so what ends up happening is a self-fulfilling prophecy where these low income families, they automatically get left behind, because I know, like the high school that I went to, for instance, like the library wasn't open for you just to hang out there. We didn't have computers back then either, but the library just wasn't open for you just to hang out there after school, right? And so for people to say the kids can just go to the library after school to do their FAFSA. Well, not if the school library closes when the school closes. They can't go do their FAFSA after school, right? And so being able to have broadband in your home is about you being able to do for these kids that are low income, to be able to, for their families to do their FAFSA, for them to apply for jobs, for them to look for scholarship opportunities, like all of these things that is just not going to be available to them if there's no internet assistance. And so that was one of the reasons why I was so disappointed that for the ACP, and I was part of the original team that wrote the legislation for the broadband benefit program, but to see the ACP not be able to take on more people, I think is really unfortunate, because you're going to see these communities fall further behind because they're just not going to have access to that. And what happens right now for lower income communities is that they're very reliant upon their cell phones to be able to do things like that. But as many of you know, that's just not, the cell phone is not necessarily the best tool to be able to do something like a FAFSA application. And you're going to again, just see these lower income communities just unfortunately, naturally not be able to keep pace with the rest of the country when it comes to this very fast moving innovation that we're involved in right now, and fast moving period in the history of the US and the world for that matter. And it really scares me, because I think that you're just going to see an exacerbation of the haves and have-nots.
As we think about our member companies and what they do, they're building fiber routes, that connect national hubs of data centers to our wireless towers, the underlying infrastructure on a national basis. Excuse me. But they also fiber to the home, fiber to the residents, fixed wireless. Kuiper is one of our member companies. They just won a BEAD award in Texas to deploy LEO services. Talk to us a little bit about, as BEAD is on the doorstep, ready to be, deployed. There's a number of states, Louisiana, for example, was just on a panel. They're advocating for a streamlining of some of the restrictions, but those that are already shovel ready to go ahead and speed the money to the award, to the project, and begin building in the unserved, underserved areas of your community and all over the country. Tell us your thoughts on what is the best way to accelerate and to get the funds out and the broadband to every person in your district and community.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, Texas we've been the biggest recipient of BEAD funds. Probably about $3.5 billion has gone to the Lone Star State, and it's been very critical for being able to deploy broadband in lower income and rural areas around the state to get everyone connected. And we have to look for different ways that we can speed that up and continue to make it more efficient, because it's also a part of the equation that I talked about earlier. It has to act as sort of a complement to the ACP and taken very seriously if we want these communities to be able to, again, just have the ability to do things like just your basic common needs. And, and I really want people to think about it, particularly when we start thinking about the infrastructure that's being built out, to think about how cities used to be, planned. Like for instance, where I grew up in Fort Worth, people used to be able to take the bus to work because all the jobs were literally in Fort Worth, and cars really were considered, luxuries at one point, not that long ago, in a place like Fort Worth. And most families may have only had, like I know my grandparents only had one car, for instance. My grandparents never had two cars. But as more and more places started to develop and people started to move out to different areas, lower income communities oftentimes weren't able to take the bus to the local steel plant or the local manufacturing shop that was inside of the cities. And so these communities missed out on those jobs because that infrastructure just wasn't there. What BEAD does is allow the infrastructure to be moved out to these areas that probably would be completely missed otherwise. And again, if we want people to be able to keep up and we want communities to all be afforded an opportunity in this new world that we live in, we have to be able to fund these types of programs.
Part of the challenge that many of our members face as they build across the country and build into Dallas and Fort Worth and other urban, suburban, as well as rural areas is the ability to get permits as quickly as possible, attached to poles, rights of way. For many of our communities, the railroad tracks still divide and symbolize the digital divide. And our companies have a hard time, a lot of times, getting permission from the railroad in a given place. The right of way, or the delay is so long and the cost is so high, it's a huge barrier. And so we're working with a bipartisan group of House and Senate members to try to fix the ability to cross the railroad in a time certain at an actual cost standard. But talk to me a little bit and to everyone about what you think and maybe how we could use some of the BEAD money to accelerate the permitting process, to give the resources to city planners and the engineers and those who are trying to give permits. What do we need? To be honest, a lot of times our member companies will say, I don't care if you give me money or not, give me a permit.
Yeah, that's right.
And I just want to build. And if you can let me build as fast as possible, I'll do it with private money. Yeah. But you're costing me time and money, and I'm losing the ability to connect the businesses, the areas, the communities that we all care about.
Yeah, and it's really a fascinating question because when we talk about permitting reform on the committee, we are mainly talking about transmission lines and oil and gas pipelines. And that's really been the conversation that's dominated everything on energy and commerce. And this part of permitting reform is really not talked about a lot. But I think that it certainly provides an opportunity for members like myself to be able to go back to our districts to talk about the importance of permitting reform and how it can benefit and empower communities. And I think in a way, like I'll tell you, like in the neighborhood that I live in Fort Worth, I have two different providers, one for my internet, and then I have another provider for my cable services, because the provider that does my cable services, they don't offer the highest speed. And then I think that if you were to cut through some of this red tape and you were to make it easier for these permits to be delivered and for people to be able to do them, whether they get government money or whether it's private funding, it would probably lower costs enough to where they could go back and take a second look in areas like the ones where I live and make it more affordable for them to be able to deploy their highest technologies in all areas instead of having them restricted to certain areas. And so I think with all, speed and deliberate nature, that we need to work on the permit and reform areas when it comes to the deployment of these things, like you talked about, the fiber optics and the other things that are going to be important to be able to make sure that communities are connected. Yeah, I think that we have to take it very seriously and look at it again, and so we can try to speed it up.
You serve on a committee and on a subcommittee on manufacturing.
Yes.
And I don't know if your district has significant or substantial manufacturing, but I do know this about Dallas. It is a major data center hub.
Yes.
And a lot of our member companies have data centers in the Dallas area. And I'll tell you a story about my old district. Zayo, who is about to be on the panel, their president, to talk about, what is important to them and how they can participate in BEAD to connect hubs of communities together around data centers that I think could be a catalyst for advanced research, for advanced healthcare, for advanced manufacturing, for precision agriculture, all of those types of things. And the connectivity of those corridors are very critical to all of our communities. And in Texas, y'all have been pretty flexible in allowing those middle mile connectors and corridors to be funded through some of your BEAD. But this is my question. In the age of AI, as data centers spring up, what is the best way on both sides of the data center? You care about energy policy, all of the above, energy. You talked about permitting on the energy side. There's a shortage of supply in the electricity markets in most places.
Yes.
Texas may be the exception. I don't know. Yeah. But what can we do to speed and accelerate the transmission, the pipelines, the grid, the electricity, the energy demands that we need to serve the data centers and then where the fiber connects to them on the other side? And that really has become the intersection and the critical infrastructure of AI. Any thoughts on the energy permitting?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for those of you that haven't been to Dallas Fort Worth lately, I think one of the most amazing things to see, and I really encourage each and every one of you to go and take a look at it. But back during the 1980s, when a famous oil and gas family, the Hunt family, was having some financial difficulties, and the Hunt family is about 3 or 4 different families, which is a whole nother long story. But it's a fascinating story. But it's a part of a long story. When they were having trouble, they had this ranch. It was called the Circle T Ranch, just north of Fort Worth. Well, long story short, this young entrepreneur who had a famous dad named H. Ross Perot Sr. His son Ross Perot Jr. bought all of this land. And the Hunt said that he would get they get the land over their dead bodies, and he managed to get the land as they were going through this bankruptcy proceeding. And when they first started talking about all the things that people were going to do out there, because it was just cows and horses out there, people thought that this couldn't happen. And Ross went to Jim Wright, who was Speaker of the House at the time, and said almost exactly what you were just saying. He said that we're not asking for any federal money at all. If you could just help us like get this law changed so we could build this airport. We can completely turn this area into like this major, hub. And that's exactly what they did. They built Alliance Airport. And once Alliance Airport came, which is basically like a manufacturing and service style airport. It's not a commercial airport. Texas Motor Speedway came, and when Texas Motor Speedway came, Deloitte and Touche came, and Fidelity came. Now Charles Schwab is out there, and it's amazing. And the other thing they have out there is a bunch of data centers. They have a ton of data centers in this newly annexed part of Fort Worth and other smaller cities like Westlake that make up the bulk of the Circle T Ranch. And it's been very critical because as the Metroplex has grown and we have gone online, these data centers have become a very important part of the Metroplex. And it's amazing to go up in the helicopter and see these data centers and see the fans and everything that are blowing. It's incredible. The other really important news, which will get me back to the question that you just asked me. I don't know how many of you saw the announcement a couple of weeks ago, but just north of Fort Worth, not in far West Texas, but a little closer into Fort Worth, but considered West Texas, in Haskell, Texas. They're talking about doing these small modular nuclear reactors to help with this data center farm that they want to do up there, which is going to be amazing. But in order to make sure that we're able to do that, we're going to have some permitting reform. And what I've been telling people on the Democratic side is that if we want the permitting reform, for the wind and the solar, we're going to have to help for the permitting reform with the oil and the gas as well. And it's going to be hugely important that this particular project take place and that we allow people that have the vision and that have the foresight like Ross had for North Fort Worth to be able to develop these areas without a lot of regulation and for them to do it in a way that's going to be beneficial because as good as the Texas grid is, we have a lot of just basic repairs that need to be made on the grid. But as Texas continues to grow, we absolutely have to have new forms of electricity that are onto the grid. And this new thermal, these small modular reactors and this announcement in Haskell, if you get a chance to Google it, to read more about it, I think it's fascinating. But I think it also gives you a glimpse of what it's going to look like in the future and how people are going to do things. And I'm excited about it personally because it sort of puts Texas and really is a compliment to all the other things that we've been able to do in energy. We're the country's leading producer when it comes to hydrocarbons. We're when it comes to putting renewable resources onto ERCOT. We've been the leader in that. We do more wind and solar than California or any other state in the union.
Don't tell anybody.
I know. And these innovations that you're seeing, like this new announcement that was made around these modular reactors, these nuclear modular reactors in Haskell, in order to get the grid to where we need to be able to get it to where it's reliable and it's still affordable. Projects like this are going to have to be able to take place, and people need to be able to get it done quickly. And I'm excited. I think that is great, and I love the fact that Texas, again, gets to be sort of the center and focal point of all of this, because I really do think that it's going to end up being the model for the rest of the country.
If you think about how development works and how the hub started and the permitting, and then how it now becomes a major center for data centers or a major hub for data centers. To complete my story, so Zayo builds a high capacity dark fiber route between Atlanta to Dallas, connecting those two hubs. And then they go from New Orleans to Chicago. And they intersect in my hometown of Jackson, Mississippi. And because we now have high capacity dark fiber routes, AWS then landed a data center, which was the largest investment in Mississippi history. It's going to total about $20 billion. And it opens up this whole new opportunity for Mississippi now in advanced cancer research, advanced manufacturing, precision agriculture. So having that infrastructure in the age of AI in the midpoint between these two major hubs in a smaller state and a state that has more low income individuals than Texas. It is the critical infrastructure, but it's also the enabling, empowering, entrepreneurial, growing, and a way to bring prosperity to new places. Zayo was able to get a middle mile grant on part of that route. That was part of the Commerce Department middle mile program. As we have these connectors, I just want you to know that it can bring to life new places and new communities. And as we look at the infrastructure of AI and we look at permitting reform, don't lose sight of the stories that it then enables, just like what you told about Fort Worth and what I just told about Mississippi. And this is a critical, strategic, national race to beat China to the AI infrastructure. So it's not only about bringing prosperity to new places or lifting people out of poverty, but it's also the national security and the international imperatives that we have in the race against China for technological supremacy, and then all the things that flow from that. And so I really hope that we can work with a bipartisan group. And we were on the Hill yesterday with the Speaker's staff, Leader Jeffrey's staff, key committee staff, and they were all talking about and all of the above broadband strategy and all of the above energy strategy and permitting reforms to speed and accelerate. And it seems like, and I wanted to ask you, do you think there's a bipartisan consensus on permitting reform that would be both on the broadband and energy side so that we can put it in the context that you and I are discussing today?
I hope there is. One of the things that, we talk about all the advantages of AI, but one of the things that sort of worries me about the age that we live in now is that I do think that it's given rise to a lot of unserious characters on Capitol Hill, where this place used to be filled with mostly people that were very serious and just maybe a couple of characters.
Yes, very thoughtful.
Yeah. And we really do need for people to sit down and think about these things seriously. And with a lot of the infotainment vacuums that people are trying to fill on Capitol Hill, I think makes it a lot harder. But I'm hoping that we can put aside those things and really roll up our sleeves and get to work on this type of thing. But I do worry because, we live in very serious times, but, Instagram and X and other platforms have made the place where I go to work at every day a lot less serious place. But the consequences are more serious than they could ever have been before, and maybe ever in the history of our country. And so I do worry. I think that there are enough of us that want to do the right thing, but can we overcome the politics that that have been created as a reality of these new things that have been driven in part by AI and this new digital world that we all live in. I always say that AI is amazing, but we don't want it to get so out of hand that we become the data, and that's what I'm worried about.
One conversation in the AI that we had yesterday on the Hill, and Mignon Clyburn, I don't know if she is here with us. She led the roundtable discussion, and it was on AI workforce and education. And AI can be an extremely powerful tool to democratize and to level the playing field and to give the ability for students anywhere from poor communities to prosperous communities, a tool to really compete and to have careers and to do well. And we were sitting around with leading companies from NVIDIA to JP Morgan to civil society and public interest in groups that really think that AI can transform education and give opportunities to places that have struggled. And so That's one other, as we look at it, all of the above AI, all of the above energy, all of the above broadband, we want AI for all. And I think that we can do that through the education workforce. And there are a lot of good companies that we would love to bring to you that are trying to do that in every part of the country in places like Dallas and Fort Worth.
Yeah, and we're trying to, and I just want people to seriously think about when I talk about the seriousness of politics in this place. I mean, I live in a state that's the most prosperous state, and is arguably the most prosperous state in the union. At the same time, we're having measles outbreaks now. So, like, that's what I mean about like, and I don't think that we would be having measles outbreaks if we didn't think about what people thought about us on some of these social media platforms. And so being able to come together to work on something like permitting reform, I think that there are enough of us on both sides that want to get it done, but can we overcome these factors that drive us into public policy rabbit holes that tell us that, we're going to take all the fluoride out of the water system? I just, so it's a real challenge. It's not an imaginary one or a fake one. It's things that are happening right now in real time in state legislatures around the country, and you'll see more and more of it seep into here. But we have a lot of amazing things that we have to do, and we have to roll up our sleeves together in a bipartisan way to do it. But we have some serious things to overcome that a lot of the things that we're here talking about today are with us, and probably wouldn't be with us if those things weren't a part of our everyday life. So it's just it's a really interesting question, and I think that it's going to be another opportunity for our country to show that we can overcome this and work together to get these things done.
Well, we look forward to working with you and bringing all of our member companies. We are distinct in that we we bring the entire ecosystem and substack of all of the critical infrastructure, as well as the leading tech companies that are developing the AI models and transforming the world in which we live. I don't envy you living in the age of politics and social media. I retired in 2008. The iPhone came out in 2007, Twitter 2007. So I saw it coming and I got out. And so I lived in a more peaceful, tranquil period of time before super PACs. But we've had bipartisan commissioners, bipartisan members of Congress. The one word of encouragement, I think, for all of our member companies and for you is that technology and broadband has historically been bipartisan. And I think that we can still keep it bipartisan, and the commitment, because it really is the underlying foundational network of our economy, our education, our healthcare, and for the future and the big races ahead of us. We've got to get this right. So we want to work with you and really team with thoughtful leaders on a bipartisan basis to get things done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to work with everybody in here because I think that it is of huge importance. And I'm glad you mentioned the national security piece, because we have to keep that in mind. We absolutely do. Thank you.
Thank you.